I'm Kate Hiseman. I worked at the University of Lincoln for zillions of years, or it felt like it. It was great area to work, and my specialism is in rural sustainability. And I left there in 2011, went to work for various big sustainability organisations, did all the international stuff, didn't like it, came back to rural sustainability. And I set up the consultancy, which Neil and I knew each other very much from. I was very much involved with with the City of Lincoln sustainability appraisals of all their local plans way back from the mid-1990s, checking how was it going to be sustainable, how was it going to be delivered, checking against lots and lots of different sustainability criteria, helping them to shape the policies so that we were thinking about communities and all sorts of things. And I set up the Sustainable Land Trust in 2013, really with a response to the fact that actually we do need communities to be more part of these processes. So I've got quite a few slides which I will probably tap through. So I'm going to, because I've done sustainability appraisals for lots of years, and also I was a UK assessor for sustainability assessments, and I even had to work on offshore islands writing sustainability legislation and so on for some of the island of Alderney who didn't have any legislation to protect their community. So I've kind of got to know different methods of assessing sustainability and how it affects people. So the thing that I struggled with over the years is that the government would come up with lots of appraisal methods, and we, as very diligent professionals, would go out there and we would adopt the method. But the methods were always very subjective, and they always ended up with a consultant, usually from a huge consultancy, coming in, getting a tender for several, tens of thousands of pounds, and then doing this assessment on a local plan or so on. And it would be them sitting in their office, and then they come out to the community, they do a consultation, and they go back and they come out again. And but what it really missed was actually it didn't bring the heart of what a community was right from the very beginning. And this is some of the flavour that you're pulling out, when we first introduced each other. So there's a methodology that has been delivered and developed, which I've done the first UK rural pilot test on to see whether it works or not. And so I'm going to introduce that. I'm also going to have a look at how that methodology is then used to understand a community, and I'm going to bring in a case study called Newton-on-Trent that we've been looking at. And then I'm going to look at a couple of examples of how the sustainability elements work from the perspective of people and their landscape. And then I'm going to have a look at the residence management committee concept, what can work and what can't work. Because if you have small developments on the edge of your village, it's most likely that the highways are not going to, they might adopt some of the roads, but the public open space will be shaped by Andrew and his landscape architect equivalent, but then the parish council doesn't want the responsibility of managing large wads of open space. And so what very often happens is that the residents in that community then form their own residence management committee, and then they have to pay a service charge to make those open spaces managed. So we'll explore that, and we'll explore a kind of a new way of thinking about how to regenerate a little community or a village using that approach as well. So the Building Research Establishment, BRE, based down in Watford. They were a government department up until quite recently, and obviously they've been shed, like many have. The Building Research Establishment are known for their sustainability criteria that they apply to buildings. And you may have come across in the past housing, I can't even remember, a code for sustainable homes. And in every policy it was, you've got to have code for sustainable homes, level 3 as a minimum. Now that's all gone out of the window, and they've called it something different, the Home Quality Mark, which has got a slightly different set of criteria. But when you're looking in your local plan, you will very often see that they still refer to the code level 3 or above. Go onto the BRE website, look at what the new standards are, and get your planning officer, get your parish council to actually understand these new requirements, because they're more holistic and more community focused. So BREEAM in this case is the environmental assessment method, and this relates to communities, building communities, not just buildings. So for the first time, we've got a measure of sustainability that is quantified. But it also enables the community to get involved, and it to be a very, very flexible way of delivering sustainability based on what you need, not what a developer or a planning officer will say is required. We use science, but we also look at the most cost-effective approaches for you as a community to get out of what you need out of if development is happening. One of the issues with planning and development is that very often like Andrew and Neil will go, right, we need an ecologist, we'll need an archaeologist, we'll need this transport specialist, and they'll start to kind of build a team, but sometimes that depends on what the developer's drivers is. Sometimes that can come a bit late in the process and you're all running around just before the application goes in. I need a bat survey, or I need something else. BREEAM community pushes the specialists up at the very beginning with the community, and there's that interface straight away. It uses community consultations, but it gets you as a community in front of fire, police, waste, everybody else who's likely to have a requirement or an input into what goes on a new scheme in or around your village. It's in accordance with policy, so it is absolutely compliant with the MPPF. And so if you apply an approach like this, you are already making sure that you are nationally compliant from a policy point of view. So what it does if you're a parish councillor or somebody, it takes that away. You don't have to worry about, am I going to be responding to a development, or am I going to be planning my neighbourhood planning exercises, and am I going to make sure that it's compliant with national policy? It's done that for you. And then at the end you get a certificate, which is quite nice with that badge, which says that actually this has been tested, and it's been tested very, very rigorously. So what Andrew and Neil were talking about was different phrases that are used in development. And sometimes what will happen is, with the donkey's years of work that they did as undergraduates and graduates, they learned a process that has to be abided by. There could be several different steps. And because of that, from a sustainability approach, we have to make sure that we fit in with those processes. So the first step that Andrew and Neil will look at is what does a potential area. I'm just trying to get that back.
Oh,
going the other way now.
The arrow.
Where's my arrow? Where's my arrow? Here we go. So the first phase is what is the area like? What actually are the principles of the development? So setting in stone. What's the archaeology like? What's the ecology like? What's the local community like? And once that information has been gleaned, then they can start to look at how would you lay it out. And then the next step up, as you back it up, is, let's have a look at the details. Where might the cycle racks be? What will the bus stops look like? What type of play equipment will go in the park, and so on.
Can I just say, are the break points at what point you're required to have a BREEAM? In terms of the size of the development?
This kind of thing goes on what's called major developments.
Right.
Or developments where there's likely to have a significant environmental impact. But what I found is this methodology is really useful for neighbourhood planning, because it asks all the questions that a neighbourhood plan would ask as well. And so it gives you the methodology for gathering your evidence and so on as well. So I've spoken to the BRE about making this a more flexible methodology that will allow you to do, as a community, allow you to do your own planning. And the case study I'll look at in a moment is the kind of the bit of a first attempt at trying to do that. So the things that I look at, and you as parish councils and people who are responsible working with communities, is that actually you'll be thinking, well, what is the governance in terms of what's going on? What are the big decisions that will affect the design, the construction, how these things will operate, what's the long-term stewardship of a site going to be like? You talked a lot earlier about the social and the well-being side. You were saying, I didn't know whether to be well-being or we're here. Well, this integrates them both. So I have to look very, very closely with the members of the community that I'm working with about health issues, well-being issues, making sure that the design is partly designed by the community and led by the community, that it's a cohesive design. So if it's your one on the edge of the village, is it sitting in its little enclave, or is it actually integrated like a spider's web into the village? And where do people move, where do people go, and how does it all work? Is there actually adequate housing for the people who live in the village, those young families who may have to, or those young people who've got to leave the village because they can't afford any housing, they can't bring up their families there, and they might come back when they retire, but that village life is gone. I then look at everything across all the natural resources. I look at all the resources, look at energy, carbon, efficiency, transport energy, and all of those things. Look at every aspect of transport. And then also I look to see, well, is there some innovation? Is there something that this community are doing in their master planning, or this architect or this design team are doing, that is really innovative? So what I do is I look across 100 different topics over 40 different sectors at any one time. And so I don't know if you've seen the film The Matrix, but sometimes it feels like that, and you kind of go, what's the impact here? How will that address that? So, and then as each stage, I'm looking in further and further detail, and the questions get harder and harder and harder. So the first part is I'll be consulting, getting everybody in the team around, what's going on, what's happening here. What would be the economic impact of a proposal? What's the local demographics like? People tell me how many, what do you need? What are your issues? And then I look at some big things like, is it, the first thing, is this like the flood? So we need to make some big thoughts about that. And we look at noise. Is it going to, impact upon the harmony, the tranquility of a place?
Can I just ask who you're invoicing for this service?
Yes. So I either do this as part of a neighbourhood plan, come in and help.
Which is
that.
Commissioned by the parish or
whatever.
district.
Yeah.
So it's not that the
or a developer's
being required to do this.
But I come in as a BREEAM assessor, so I'm a third-party person that sits and takes an independent assessment of what's going on. But as part of that, I now get heavily involved with the community, and find out exactly what they need and make sure that that's then permeating through the design team,
Yeah, the reason I'm asking the question, obviously, is who pays the money? Because from a parish council point of view, that could be a big chunk of consultancy money that's got to be found from somewhere.
Yeah.
And then you are acting on behalf of the parish council, who may or may not have a NIMBY attitude towards the developers imposing.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of criteria in there.
There's a lot of politics that I don't get involved in, because I have to be third party. Yeah.
But this is before a sod's been cut. But post-planning permission, is it?
No, this is pre-plan.
This the case study Kate's talking about here is really for putting forward a huge master plan scheme, perhaps using that sort of local exceptions approach. This is an example of a methodology that, say, a private landowner or a parish council or somebody like that might use to promote a big scheme in perhaps, a rural settlement where perhaps 2 years ago this would never have been contemplated.
Well, I'm just trying to get my mind around. 1.2 million worth of 106 money represents a big chunk of housing. If you're not very careful, you're happy with the 106 money because it's for you, as it were. Over here, there's a whole load of development going on that must have some overview.
Yeah.
And the overview is coming either from a the parish council or town council initiating that process and hiring you to oversee it.
Yeah, and to work with them to help them with that.
Yeah.
But also the developer might say, okay, well, I want this to be a sustainable development. I think you were talking, Andrew, about a scheme, I can't remember if it was Cherry Willingham or somebody, but they were saying they wanted something very sensitive that would fit in with, they were very, you know, and so it's that type of person that I generally work with. It's the person that actually wants to do the right thing. And they probably, as a landowner, they might be a small, medium-sized landowner that have got a stake in their community anyway. And so, you know, so that's kind of how it works.
But there are some hidden or obvious declared interests involved in all of this from the point of view of who's acting in whose best interests, and various people take on the burden of representing that best interest, and one of whom can be the developer who's got a blind bit of interest in representing the community's view. He just wants to get his houses built. So that's a monitoring and overseeing aspect of processes, which I think is quite interesting.
And a guidance and a making sure that if you want to do a BREEAM Communities assessment, you have to comply with the criteria. So you have to deliver a lot of different, you know, all these 100 of tick boxes.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about. I mean, things huge in that context.
That's right. And if the developer doesn't, or if you're doing a neighbourhood plan that doesn't, then you're then struggling to meet certain sustainability criteria. So how then can you demonstrate that you're sustainable? So I take that third-party view and say, well, actually, you're strong on social, but actually you've got a transport issue here, we need to address this. Or you're strong on providing affordable homes and social homes, but what you're missing is really great landscapes for the kids to play in. Let's look and let's get that sorted out. So.
Yeah, I'm sorry to dwell on it, distracting, but I'm just trying to grasp the mechanism and who's actually...
Who pays? Who pays?
Whose interests are you working with?
Where would this come in relation to a neighbourhood plan? Is it before it's adopted, before it's even agreed to have one, or after it's agreed
Usually what happens is a parish council, or a community would get together and then they'd enrol their parish council, or it would work the other way around. They say, right, we want a neighbourhood plan. And part of the neighbourhood planning process is to make sure it's sustainable. And so what I found, I've done a few neighbourhood plans with Neil, and when it gets to that bit about sustainability, that's where you get lots of interest from the community. But they don't always necessarily know what is a material factor from a planning and development perspective, and what would be a parish council factor in terms of, well, we have dog nests, we have this, we have that, we have other. It's a sustainability issue.
After it's been agreed to have a neighbourhood plan.
Yes.
It isn't a means of getting a community to agree to a neighbourhood plan.
No, you would have a community who say we want a neighbourhood plan. Okay. How can we collect the evidence to make sure that...
Yeah, because at the generalistic state of we're going to have to build 300 houses here, at that point of the generalistic approach, there's no practical evidence of how it's going to be done. So a lot of that analysis you can't do because there's no plans to look at to do it.
But that's the whole point, because with a normal development, you do a development sketch and it will go out to consultation. With this approach, your consultation comes first.
Right.
The community says, this is what we need. And that then influences what happens afterwards.
I think this is very much embedded in the I mean, the case study we're looking at, this is somebody who is part of, when they set the project up, decided to embed this BREEAM methodology. I don't think this is the sort of thing you can use retrospectively. I don't think Kate can come in and review this scheme and see if it gets a
design and decision making.
It's not a retrospective assessment. It needs to be embedded from.
Yeah, what's my concern really is at what point it's relevant and is an impactive on the finalised plans.
Well, you'll see once we kind of go, but it's right at the beginning. So basically, when you look to assess how sustainable you are, and you look to assess a development or a neighbourhood plan, I said about the certificate, you can then reach various levels, and then you will get a certificate at the end. So this hopefully will help, because this part of the BREEAM Communities process is the very, very first thing that you do, is you get to understand the community. So it promotes community involvement in any decision that affects any part of design or construction or operation, long-term stewardship, which we've talked about, and it is the backbone of a sustainability measure. It runs all the way through the decision-making process. So when a transport expert is coming in and saying, well, highways say that my roads need to be this wide or this, that and the other, then you go back to that residence, or you go back to the public and say, this is what we're thinking, you happy with that? Are there any other things that we've not really thought about, any local issues that we need to be aware of? It's quite difficult to explain, but so this is sort of a bit of a diagram really, is that the first thing is involve people, build a profile of issues. So when you do your neighbourhood plan, you will do a visioning event. What do we want our community to look like? What are the big issues? This is the same process that happens, which is why it fits into neighbourhood planning quite well, because it does the work for you. You listen to, you acknowledge the concerns, and one of the most important parts, which you often see lacking in big developments or other developments, is that continual feedback. So in a case study that I'll look at, the first thing that we did was we had a Facebook, a Twitter and a website, and everything that we were doing we were putting on. This is what we're doing right now, this is what we're thinking about right now, thinking about ecology. Does anybody know anything about ecology? You know, what can you help with? And also showing that every view that people has been responded to, has been understood and shared. So we look at the needs and priorities of people, and then some of the things then that we look at in that first stage is what's the ecology like, what's the flooding like, what ideas do people have about design, what do you want to see in your public realm, green infrastructure, linking the landscape, what the landscape is like, and also what the local vernacular is, what do the houses and the buildings look like that are in your village or your community. We also then look at, well, if we're planning new houses, and you're planning parks, or you've got a village hall idea, or something like that, these are great, but actually can you deliver them in your community? Can the developer deliver what you want? It's okay putting in an aspirational plan, but if you then have to wait 15 years for somebody to come up with the money for a village hall, it's not a sustainable scheme in my eyes. You've got to prove that you can deliver it up, you know, before you actually put these things in. The other thing we look at is who's going to manage the facility. So again, developer will come in, they'll design something, it'll look great, but unless Andrew knows that somebody's actually going to maintain his building to a good standard, you know, it's not the whole story, is it really? And so what we look at is there anybody in the community who might want to take on the management of that space or that facility? We look at local parking, we've talked quite a bit about that. We look at local transport and cycling. But we also look at, okay, well, who in the community might get trained up to be part of this process, either to be part of the BRIAM process or part of managing a site, or even are there some local jobs that we can create whilst we're constructing a site or managing it afterwards. So where consultation occurs, we create a consultation plan. So we sit down with everybody in the room and say, what's the best way to engage with people in your village? We then do some background research, looking at all the demographic, Office of National Statistics, your local ward profiles and so on, to get a bit of an idea as to whether you've got an ageing population, where you've got a good vibrant population, where your community is going. Then we say, okay, tell us everything about all of these issues, what might hold you up. It's not very responsive. So then we carry out the main consultation. So this will be a variety of different ways, through social media or different ways face to face, and we look at different things, and when we agree who's going to deliver everything, and then The final thing then it was, what do these things going to look like? What do you want to see, and how will you integrate, and who's going to manage it? So Newton-on-Trent, I'm going to try and be aware of time as well, is the one that we applied the first rural BREEAM communities to. And interestingly, they hadn't got a neighbourhood plan in place. So we went to the parish council and said, there's this methodology. I'm coming in as an external person. Yes, I was being paid by the developer, but actually quite a nice unusual position is that this developer said, I just want a more, I want our village to be sustainable. And he's lived in that village for 3 generations, and he said, I want cradle to grave. I want everybody who's born here to have the option of dying here if they like. So I worked with the parish council and said, look, if I do all your consultations and I hand over every single thing, including all the little sticky notes that people have made and everything, you can have that for your neighbourhood plan. And that will save you so much time and money in having to do the consult. So we did that together. We did work with the parish council, and we did that as an exercise. So we had a look at what's happened. So we've got in the village, not many middle-aged people, not many people with young families, but a large amount of people who were retired and actually were having to move out of the village because there was no care for them. They were having to move to Saxilby or out to a nursing home. And what was coming through quite strongly was that those who were coming up to that age were getting really worried because they'd seen their friends lose their friends to another village and they got no contact with them at all. It's actually in the top 10 most deprived areas in the county because there are huge barriers to housing. Newton-on-Trent's a lovely Lincolnshire village with lots of lovely big 4-bedroomed homes. But actually younger people, we can see, aren't being able to get onto the property ladder. And what's only under half of the Torksey ward are actually economically active. Only 50% of that ward are actually economically active. You think, well, that means that there's a lot of unemployment. Nope, it's because of our demographics.
Yeah.
But we have a high level of people with big qualifications. So you start to get a feel for your area. But then there's a lot of youngsters who have got, no qualifications. And the people who have got the money in the village are in managerial positions. So those that are in that age group are emigrating out of the village, coming back in at the end of the day, not spending their money in the village. So Newton-on-Trent, just next to the River Trent, within the Torksey ward, this is the profile of the village at the moment. This is the road up to Gainsborough, and this is the A57 road from Retford over that way, Lincoln that way. And actually what I did, I looked quite a lot at the medieval structure of the village and how the village grew. And what the village were really unhappy was that when they built the A57, they built it straight over the village green, and they cut the village in half.
Yeah.
So there's not been a lot of thought in, and these people feel quite, let down. And there have been some huge infrastructure, projects in this area along the Trent, and the villagers said, well, we just want a footpath. We just want a footpath that will lead us to somewhere else. And they've been promised it by the local authority and by, the different agencies, government agencies who've invested money, and that's never actually happened. So the guy who owns the farm in the village says, you know what, I'm going to give this land, and I want to give it back. I'm going to use this land, and I want to be able to do something for my village. So that's the part of the land up there, and this is what's on it at the moment. It's organic free-range chickens. Moving on. So the first thing we did was we worked with the community and said, right, let's create a plan. How do we want to consult? What should be in the consultation plan? What did we do? We visited people, sat down with the lady at the post office and her family, visited the church, because the church were actually providing during the day schoolroom facilities and dinner facilities for the primary school next door because they hadn't got enough space. So there was a real symbiotic relationship going on between the church and the school. And the school was suffering because their numbers were going down. The church needed the school to be successful because the school were paying for space for them to have their classroom. There was a local leisure park nearby, very isolated community in their own way. We went up and had a chat with them, what would happen, if we did something. And we had a chat with local businesses. And we rang them on the phone because everybody's busy, And then we then sent out a letter to every household. We wanted to know a bit more about people. And we did that 2 or 3 times, asking what's important to them. We did a community visioning event, had some questionnaire. When we started to come up with some concepts, we then got the community back into a room and said, these are the designs, do you like them or not? Or is there anything we should change? We've taken your ideas on, what do you think? So we did a whole load of things, and what this did when I'm an assessor, it means that I'm then assessing across a range of different issues and priorities that are then shaping the final outcome of what happens.
Can I ask just a question?
Sure.
In any community there will be people who have land that could be developed.
Yes.
Do they influence this kind of thing a lot? Because obviously they would want to influence it.
They would want to influence, but they are invited to every public meeting just the same as a local garage or somebody else. I mean, there were 3 other landowners who were considering putting planning applications in, and they found this quite useful because this was partly helping them to decide, well, do I do this or not? Can I actually deliver what the community needs? And with a couple of them, they kind of got, no, actually, we'll leave it for now. But it gave them an opportunity then to think, well, if I'm going to do something in the future, at least I know what I'm going to have to demonstrate, if you like. So, out of all of the work that we did with everybody, people said, we've lost the pub. We had 2 pubs, we've got none now. We need somewhere to, there's no village hall. The local Methodist church had shut the doors. There was only the Anglican church. There was no hairdresser. They'd lost every facility. I did some work to look at, over the last 200 years, how many businesses and what kind of activities that community had. And there were hundreds. But now there were 11 when I did my count in 2014. So they wanted a village walk. They got nowhere to walk the dog because whilst they were next to the River Trent, there's no footpaths, no prowls, public rights of ways or anything. They got a play park, and it was all right, but it was a bit unstimulating and the kids didn't really use it. And what was really sad is that the community got a fabulous allotment resource, but it was the other side of the A47 and it was part of that original village that had been cut off when the A57 was built. So families were saying, if we want to use an allotment, we've got to get our little kids in the pushchair, go across to that central island, and it's busy, then go across again, and then if we make it, then we can get to the allotment. Because of the demographics, they felt isolated, it was very difficult to get out to some of these services. But actually, we had a really, really active under-11s football team. Didn't know that, but they had ambitions of getting bigger and they wanted to be in higher leagues and so on. They said, well, we can't do that if there isn't the space to help us do it. And they actually said, wildlife, we're next to the Trent, but we can't get to it. We want to have nature walks and so on. So we started to throw about some ideas with the architect and with Neil and with the others, and we were saying, what do you want this to look like? And we went on a visit to Hillholt Wood, and they came back and went, oh, they really like that. We'd like a village hall that's around a pond area made of rammed earth or something. And if we're doing play parks, we want it to be of natural materials. And they said, well, got to be able to walk the dog, got to be able to push a pushchair and have the dog as well. So we're starting to think about really, valuable information that people are thinking about. They've got to get to the next village. It's only a mile away. They want a footpath. They want to actually be able to get out and into the village, because some of these youngsters, the 16, those that were left, they wanted to cycle. It's a big thing for, lots of men cycle now. They got nowhere to cycle. And for those people who were struggling, they got a bus service, but that bus service had eroded over time. And the only way, when we spoke to the bus companies, is that if you have more people, you can have a better bus service.
That's not the one where it goes on Sundays one way.
Not quite. But we ended up looking at this village as being it's in genteel decline. And it was quite sad. So there's obviously one place here that I have to press. Oh. I just want to go back to that a little bit, if I can. I'll try. I might not be able to.
Oh, that blue arrow does that get it?
Oh, that might take me back. Thank you. No, I'm all over the place now.
Use the mouse.
Use the mouse. Makes sense. Let me just go back and make sure I'm on the. That was the process. That's the priorities. So. This one here, this little picture here, was a building scheme that had already happened in the village. And it was quite a few houses, but the developer had done such a good job that actually the village were really, really proud of these new houses, because they'd really understood. And they said, if we want new housing, we want them to look like that, please. So we looked at that area of land and we said, okay, well, we want to have at least 25% open space, and we want to have all of these things happening. And we created the checklist, if you like, of what had to be in this space. This is a master plan. This is a sketch layout of how the space could be designed, but we didn't have any detail in it. And so we had the village hall. We also had a business barn here because it had just been upgraded to hi-fi, the fibre, fast broadband. And there was quite a lot of people said, you know what, I would run I could work from home, but if I need to go into the office every now because I need reprographics, or I want somewhere where I can sit as like a bit of hot desk. So we did the village hall, a business barn, all around a village pond, with a new village green. Homes that were for those that needed to go into care, very, very close to the village hall and very, very close to the post office and so on. And then we had some eco-exemplar homes built in here as the eventual design, because the youngsters said, I want an energy efficient house and I need 4 bedrooms because I'm going to have kids and I want a decent sized back garden and different things. Everybody, it's all the aspirational stuff. And then what we actually found in the consultation is that quite a few people had said, well, I don't like housing estates, they're soulless. I'd like to build my own house. So we said, okay, well, let's make a space available that we will help you to design and build your own house. So it's like a self-build. And so we then had all of these spaces, but we also had affordable homes, but we have them pepper potted throughout, so you would never know that they're affordable homes. So your next door neighbour could be anybody, and it didn't really matter.
Is this a greenfield site then?
This is, well, it's got the chickens on, it is a greenfield.
That's it.
Yeah. Right. So we had the community hub with the licensed bar. We looked at a pub, and we also noticed that a lot of pubs in the area had closed down. And we noticed that if we put the village hall quite near to the school, the mums could go from school, have a tea and cake, meet up with other mums, instead of just driving out of the village. They could actually park their cars at the village hall and walk across the road, rather than, like most village lanes, going through the middle. It was a snake lane through the middle of the village with 4x4 cars, and buses couldn't get through and everything. So we had a sort of tea room during the day, pub at night, village pond. But also what we thought was that I'd be watching George Clarke's Amazing Spaces, and I'd be talking to the architect a bit, and he said, There's a lot of people want a lot from their village hall space. Why don't we have to be like this? Why don't we have panels that you can pull out and so you can create a little meeting room? If the parish council want to get together. If somebody wants to do yoga and they want to pull out a different section of the space in the evening, you know, so we had a space that could be used for anything at any time and divided up. So this was the first concept from the architect. This is the business barn side, and the community said I want it to look like an agricultural building because we've got these chicken sheds. I want it to look like a bigger version of that. They wanted community greens. They wanted to use them as outdoor classrooms. The school was really quite keen on that. And also this network of SUDs, sustainable urban drainage. That's, you know, it's there in every scheme now. But they wanted these to be attractive, that people could use, not just those that you put the great big, you know, fence around and you don't want your kids to fall in them. They wanted all the different habitats that they'd lost, copses, trees, and also they wanted a nice set of walks. So these were just some things. And this is, we played around with figures. 17% affordable, 32% for the market, 20% for people to build themselves, 9% and then 22% retirement is what we eventually came up with. How are we going to deliver it? I'm going to move on quite quickly here. The community said, this village hall is too important. We want to run it, but we don't want it run by volunteers. We're going to set up our own community company to do it. Okay, that's good. So the community then said, but these outdoor open spaces, we fought hard for these, we want them to be managed. And so they asked us as the Sustainable Land Trust to come and help hold their hand for the first 3 years, help them to understand how to manage open spaces, residents management committee kind of format as well. And then they take it over once they've got the skills. We're a City and Guilds training centre, so we could train people in the skills that they need.
Who were the owners then?
They were the farmer.
No, I meant when you've got you said you're setting up a management community partnership to manage the development of the community provisions element of it.
Yeah, so they won't manage the development of it, they'll manage the running of it.
Yeah, well, what status do those have, the company have?
That will be a community, it could be a KIC or it could be a social enterprise or it could be a charity.
Right.
Yeah, so it's still going through planning, but these are the things that with Brown Communities, a developer has to sign a legal document with the BRE to say, I will do this, and this is how I will do this, and that then goes to the planning officer.
The reason I ask is because there are certain issues with regard to charities, private partnerships. There's a complexity within that from a point of view of overview and control. There
is, yeah, and I work very much in that area with communities as well and helping them to choose which is the best legal framework to set themselves up in. There's a design code that the community said we want. So the benefits of doing this approach was that we were able to get the developer and the community together really early. We built a good relationship with the council, say what do you want this? How will it inform your neighbourhood plan, and so on. Understood the priorities of the community and involved them in how they're going to manage the site afterwards. And then also, from the developer's point of view, it was able to enable that person then to address all those questions and queries as the thing went along. Design, redesign, rethink, take out, put in. And then when it did eventually go to the planning department, it was quite a well thought out scheme which delivered on what the community needed. So this is quite important, just quickly. We wanted to make sure that people could get around. So we said, if you're going to design something, a lot of people now use mobility scooters. You can't expect that it will be somebody with, a frame or something like that, and actually they want to be with their grandkids. So you've got to have a space that's wide enough for a mobility scooter and the next member of the family pushing a pram if they're walking around together. And so I assess what the designer and the street designer is doing. How is that safe? How is it comfortable for people? How will it disturb people? And actually, do people feel safe and secure when they're walking around? you talked about connectivity. I look at how the villagers connect with each other. This is one in Mersey Forest that I think is great because this is a commercial build, but actually you look at how these urban spaces, and it's a nice network through, doesn't look like a big thick old industrial estate. Look at lots of different things. Andrew, you talked about shared spaces. That's something I assess very, very strongly. I even look at the microclimate. Are you creating a wind corridor? Are you creating things like that? I look at the temperature. Are you going to make sure that that doesn't happen? And I will be checking and I will be assessing every single part of that flood risk report. How do we think about the future? Avoiding the heat island effect and so on and so forth. And then also, what type of innovative or interesting things can you do if you are in a flooded area that's actually attractive and people can use? So this is kind of the landscape bit. This is what was needed in the landscape. And these were the main things. So community consultation said we needed that. I looked at water flow and said we needed this, and also what the character of that landscape needed to look like. So I was assessing all of these things. But most importantly, I was saying, well, how can that community grow food themselves? How can they regulate their soil quality? And what kind of cultural services will their landscape provide for them? Is it going to be nice? Does it provide a sense of place, a sense of inspiration, of tranquility? Is it places that people can feel anchored to their village?
How did the farmers react to that?
They were actually not too bad, because remember, there's no public rights of way around here, so it didn't really impact on them. But we looked at how people would move up and down the high street, how they'd get to the Trent. We ended up designing a new footpath, the path that went from Newton-on-Trent up to Lauterton, because then that enabled all of these farming interests to stay being economically active and put their money in the community, but enabled people to move around. So these are some of the site features, some of the ponds. This would be the village hall, overlooking these swales and all of these things. And then what the community were quite keen, they liked the idea of portable allotments. They hated the thought of somebody having allotments, but then not having the time to manage it, so it just goes to weed. So they said, let's have them in pods along the streets, but actually through the village as well. And you can hire an allotment space, one or several of these, and if you don't use it, then the residents management committee in charge of parks and open spaces might give you 3 months, then they'll take it back and they'll use it themselves.
It becomes quickly obvious who's not looking after it.
Exactly, yeah,
blood pressure's quite significant.
Yeah. And it actually is quite nice. Well, that's right, yeah, because there's a little bit of competition.
Yeah.
We brought it together. I'm not going to go through all of that because of time, and that's the benefits of it. This is called the New Landscapes, New Communities programme that we run, and it forms part of the concept of garden cities and garden villages. And it started off with a guy called Ebenezer Howard, and he developed Welling Garden City and so on. But what he came up with, he looked at the issues way back then of the fact that you've got a rural community that's got wonderful environmental quality, but really, really rubbish social inequality and very, very poorly paid jobs and so on and so forth. Then they looked at what it's like living in a city, and they're right, you get high wages, but your environment is really rubbish. So then he said, well, I want something that I can put this together, and so this is why all those garden cities then were developed, because it was his inspiration. And you could almost say that this was the beginnings of social sustainability, starting in a planning and development. You probably studied Ebenezer Howard at university.
Planning,
yes, yeah. Very familiar to people. So he laid out a concept of what a sustainable community should look like and all the different things. It's very different today, because now we wouldn't have artesian wells and we wouldn't have asylums and blind and deaf institutions and so on, but that was way back then.
Very socially conscious.
And convalescent homes and so on. But they had allotments, so the allotments need to be where the people are, and So that's out of date, but he was looking at how people could work. So we as a trust, we started to look at this, and we looked at places like Welwyn Garden City. And we thought about it from the perspective of if there is a development happening on the edge of a village where the members of the community, once the developer's gone, and there's going to be this residents management committee who are going to be responsible for open spaces, what actually is really important? It costs the parish council, you'll all know, an enormous amount of money to cut the grass every year.
Mm.
What benefits do you get from cutting the grass?
Abuse.
What disbenefits do you get? So we looked and we said, okay, this looks really lovely, but what services does all this open space provide? It gives a nice landscape, and we all get a spiritual connection with the landscape, so that's okay. But it doesn't actually do anything. This tree looks great, but it's a willow tree.
Oh,
so why aren't we making products out of the willow? Why aren't we growing vegetables around it?
Bat making factory next to it.
So what we looked at is, what are the principles here? So this is the principles of a garden village. And we looked at how can we actually make sure that when we're helping communities develop residents management committees, or even have an input into designing their little extensions and so on, or if it's being imposed upon you, let's apply these principles. So I'm not going to go into them, but we're running out. So there's got to be a really good vision, but also let's think about the practicalities as we talked about. How do you govern a space? How do you govern a planning process? But also, what are the bigger challenges? What about climate change, ecological design, the actual availability of land and land values as well? So we said, right, what we want is we want a residents group to be involved in establishing and operating an open space through their committee, either as a CIC, a social enterprise, or a charity, or some mechanism. This isn't helpful because everybody wants to go home. We also said that these spaces have to be closed loop systems, so you have to be able to manage them efficiently, but also get the most out of these open spaces. Look at the different services that an open space and an ecosystem can provide, but also make sure that you have the skills within your community to be able to manage them. And also, there are great employment opportunities. If you've got an allotment space and you don't have to, if it's a brand new allotment space and it's not got that covenant on it where it says you cannot make money out of your allotment, you could set up a community food growing enterprise that does a food box scheme that helps the elderly people, for example. So social enterprise is important, and everything has to benefit your local community. So we're doing some projects where we're putting this into practice. This is Oakham, that's Oakham, and this is 1,000 house scheme, so it's quite a big scheme. But they're doing it in phases, as you can see with all the colours. And then across the road, because it's Oakham, they've got the polo fields and the gymkhanas and the rural agricultural centres. I'll go. So what we're doing is we're setting up a community food cooperative. We're training people in how to manage their landscape. This is a new community with no traditions. So we're creating their first pop-up village fete, and we're doing all sorts of things. But then, because they're taking on all the legacy of the flood risk and and all of those types of things, we're training them in how to interpret all those planning documents and all those conditions about how to reduce flood risk and so on, so they're getting that understanding. And so these are kind of some of the things that we're doing with them. And that's it.